Hello and welcome to Bowl of Ideas, the podcast discussing all things poetry. My name is James Carter-Geddes. I read English literature at the University of St Andrews, and I am the host of this podcast. Why should you listen to some lowly student ramble on about poets and their works when you could plug into professional podcasters and academics with much more experience? Well, I don't know really. You tuned into this podcast. Come and join me as I invite a very special guest each episode to discuss their favourite poet. We will read together, laugh together, and maybe even cry together, but all in the good name of poetry. So, give us a follow, drop us a like, and enjoy this episode of Bowl of Ideas. Hello and welcome. It's a pleasure today to have Mr. George Wilkinson, student at Westminster School, studying English, history, philosophy and Latin. I hope I got your A-levels right there. It's a pleasure to have you on, George. Please tell us 3 fun facts about yourself.
So as James illustrated, I do a lot more humanities. I'm going to study at university. I'm going to study archaeology and ancient history. I specialize, or my particular interest is in ancient religion and burial sites. I do bookbinding and I collect old books. My school runs the only is the only secondary school that still runs a functional bindery.
Very nice.
So yeah,
yes.
Pretty much it.
Lovely. Yes. Well, that's very interesting, and I feel like it's in keeping with who we are looking at today as our poet. He was a metaphysical poet. We'll go back to that in a second. Made priest, or perhaps a priest-made poet would be better. He was born in 1572, died in 1631. He was born into a recusant Catholic family in a very Protestant country. He married the daughter of the MP Sir George Moore without Sir George's knowledge, which meant he subsequently lost his job in the kind of government circle, fell into a poverty that kind of he could only get out of once he became a priest in the Church of England, and then was made Dean of St Paul's Cathedral, a very high and respectable position. He wrote sonnets, he wrote love poems, erotic poems, epigrams, elegies, songs, satires, and sermons. Who am I talking about today?
Well, this is John Donne, possibly one of the greatest English poets, particularly of his time. As you mentioned, John Donne's, I think his influence upon English poetry is very visible. He's mentioned quite passionately by T.S. Eliot. Has a few lines where he describes John Donne's poetry, and he does really enjoy the metaphysical aspects of John Donne poetry. Same with W.B. Yeats.
Yes, well, that's great. Certainly, big name, respected by lots of big poets since then. But let's just introduction. What are Donne's big themes? If you could list some of his, what he's most concerned with as a poet.
Well, you can really split Donne in two, with his love poetry and his religious poetry. His love poetry is from his earlier life. This features stuff like he uses a lot of conceits with like the age of discovery, like death, funeral imagery, especially after the death of Anne More. He talks about like manacles chaining him to his love. The Flea, for instance, is one of his most famous poems, describing like how their blood is brought together in the flea.
Yes, very daring poem, isn't it, Flea?
Yes,
kind of like one of the greatest chattered line poems. Yeah. After maybe Marvell's poem to his coy mistress, it's kind of up there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Carry on.
And then on the more religious side, he talks about there's a lot of journey imagery with, for example, Good Friday riding westward. He also talks about in like a more sexual manner about his relationship with God and his religious beliefs. There's also a lot of stuff about the afterlife, eschatological imagery, his fears about where he's going. He asks for punishment a lot from God, and that really is influenced by his religious background.
Yes, batter my heart, 3-person God. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So great. That was a brilliant introduction. I feel like without much further ado, we should probably read some of his poetry. So let's start with one of his holy sonnets, read to us now by George. Holy Sonnet number 19.
Holy Sonnet number 19. Oh, to vex me, contraries meet in one. Inconstancy unnaturally hath begot a constant habit, that when I would not, I change in vows and in devotion. As humorous is my contrition as my profane love, and as soon forgot, as riddlingly distempered, cold and hot, as praying, as mute, as infinite, as none. I durst not view heaven yesterday as today. In prayers and flattering speeches I court God. Tomorrow I quake in fear of his rod. My my devout fits come and go away like a fantastic ague, save that here, those are my best days when I shake with fear.
Very well read. What a poem. There's a huge amount to unpack here. Uh,
Yes.
I mean, certainly what you were talking about with the kind of potentially erotic side to these love poems to God, which is very unusual for the Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral, right? Coming through.
Yeah.
What can you say about, yeah, the relationship between love, sex, sensual imagery in this poem is religion?
Well, this poem as a whole, like the things he says are like they're quite heretical. The things he said, the way he
Mm.
approaches his relationship with God is quite heretical. Lines like courting God, and even like the phallic imagery, true fear of his rod, obviously seem to have a more like a physical relationship with God. And I think Holy Sonnet 19 is more emblematic of a wider of this wider idea of he desires physical connection with God's
Mm.
will in a manner which isn't necessarily aligned with how the
Mm.
Protestants would have viewed religion.
Yeah.
And I think this is really where we get to talking about how John Donne views God and religion as a whole.
Mm.
Obviously, you mentioned earlier, John Donne originally is a Catholic. In fact,
Mm.
his brother Henry died after being after he was jailed because he was hiding a Catholic, and he dies in jail in 1593. I think John Donne's uncle as well was was condemned to death for being Catholic, a Catholic priest. And John Donne's conversion really comes at a time where Catholicism is becoming illegal, and Catholicism is really being persecuted. So there is elements, and a real question with Donne is how like serious, how committed
Yeah.
was that conversion? Because the images he's presenting
Yeah.
are founded in more Catholic relationship with God. The Protestants preach sola fides; it is only by faith which you can achieve salvation. There is no longer that
Mm.
and connection with God which Catholicism provided, like
Mm.
a human connection. And I think this is really what Dunn's really getting at, that he needs he needs God to be close. He needs to have a physical punishment for his sins, and also he requires a physical connection in his devotion. Um,
Mm.
yeah. So stuff like fantastic ague, the sickness he demands, or devout fits. These are very physical manifestations of his devotion or his
Yeah.
divine connection.
And what do you think about the kind of semantic field of illness and ague? We've got, as you say, riddlingly, sorry, distempered, cold and hot, like a fantastic ague. My devout fits, I quake, and so on and so forth. Donne himself got quite ill, didn't he? He had lots of
Mm.
hardships with. He almost died, I think, of something ague
Yes.
related.
Yes, he does. He almost dies, and he writes the poem "A Hymn to God in My Sickness." It's a really, really beautiful poem. Actually, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to read the first stanza of it. If I know
Go
we're
on,
going a
yeah, take
bit
us
off
away.
piece, but it's a really beautiful line. It says, "Since I am coming to that holy room, where with thy choir of saints forevermore, I shall be made thy music. As I come, I tune the instrument here at the door, and what I must do then, think here before." It's
Mm.
this idea of he has a sense of doubt in his life about
Yeah,
religion, about God, about what God is. And I think his sickness, these ideas of sickness imageries, he's trying to describe how he is physically, he seems, it, it seems to be a physicalization of his feelings of like abstract love.
yeah,
I think it's the foundation point of all his holy sonnets. Um, he's trying to understand this transcendent devotion which he can't quite qualify, and
yeah.
he does that through comparing it to the things he views as the highest forms of emotion, which is sex in his eyes.
Yeah.
Even when he asks for punishment for his sins, because it's key to remember with the Catholic faith, you can do physical things. Your actions affect whether you achieve salvation or not. However, for the Protestants, Luther really goes against this idea of action. He says it is only through faith which you can achieve
Mhm.
salvation. And Donne struggles with this idea. Donne wants to be able to do something. He is constantly plagued by the fear of being Calvin's reprobate. Calvin believed that there were two groups of people. You were either elect or reprobate. The elect were going to heaven, the reprobates were going to hell. There was nothing you could do to change that. And Donne seems to struggle with this. He fears being in the reprobate. He fears that his actions can't change his sin, his
Yeah.
inherent sin. Um, and I think that when he talks about his physical relationship with God, so the sex stuff, and also the when he talks about physical punishment from God in the rest of his holy sonnets, um, these are more calls to action. He wants to be able to do something to rid himself of his sin, even though he cannot, because he's struggling with this idea that that the physical world is incapable of describing or even qualifying the transcendent.
Wow, that's a lot. Yes, I'm very helpful at that. It's good to dip into that other context as well. Thank you, George, for enlightening us with that kind of context. Great. So yeah, George, you talked a lot about his religious views and how that informed his poetry. I just wondered if you could tell us a bit about the origins for those, where they came from.
Yeah, so as I said before, it's important to recognize that Donne did come from a Catholic background, and he never really his ideas do still remain Catholic. He never really fully rejects the Catholic faith, even though he adopts the ideas of Protestantism. The foundation stones are there. I think we can
Yeah.
when we can talk about Augustine, Aquinas, and Aristotle here, and how they influenced his views of reality. So Augustine, as I said before, Augustine says that we have a radically disorganized, disordered will. Our ideas of sex, our ideas of goodness, morality, these are all disordered, and we are plagued by original sin. And
Mm.
this is really the foundation stone of how Donne sees himself, his body. Um,
Yeah.
so in his later poetry, and this is really defined by the difference between his earlier and his later poetry. In his later poetry, he starts to condemn his own body. He needs physical restoration of a previous ideal. So Aristotle talks about the forms, the idea of sorry, no, Plato talks about the forms. Plato talks about the forms and these ideas of the perfect human, or like the perfect being, eudaimonia. So, and what Donne's trying to do is rid himself of this body that is impure. And so in Holy Sonnets, he starts talking about how he wishes to be burnt, reduced to ashes, reformed. I think it's Holy Sonnet. I think it's Holy Sonnet 14, where he says he wishes to be drained, or re-blessed. He uses a lot of imagery, metaphors of ablutions,
Yes.
baptismal imagery. He calls for God to give him, that those sighs and tears might return, and flood his world, essentially drown him again. But that drowning is not enough in his view. His body itself is the impure thing; it must be burnt. And I think
Mm.
for Donne, it underpins what I really think is the most important idea of Donne, and what gives him value is the idea that Donne is trying to understand the transcendent, the metaphysical,
Yes.
by tying it to the physical, tying it to what exists in reality, and attempting to understand it in that way.
Very good. Yeah, reducing it down. Yeah,
Mm.
trying to reconcile the two, which I guess is quite metaphysical, maybe you could say, more
Yes,
broadly.
yes.
But we'll talk about that in a sec. A kind of metaphysical reaction against Elizabethan poetry that was seen as a bit sort of plain, conventional. I always think that poetic movements just tend to be reactions against the old ones. So
Mm.
poets are constantly in discourse and dialogue with each other across history without really realizing it. And then the other thing I noticed that sometimes he's because you're reacting against the reaction against the initial, it becomes the initial, which is kind of what you're talking about with Augustine and all of that. He's harkening back to the past. So yeah, really helpful. Shall we have a look at another one of his poems?
The Dissolution by John Donne. She is dead, and all which die to their first elements resolve. And we were mutual elements to us, and made of one another. My body then doth hers involve, and those things whereof I consist hereby in me abundant grow and burdenous, and nourish not but smother. My fires of passion, sighs of air, water of tears, and earthly sad despair, which my minerals be, but ne'er worn out by love's scrutiny, she to my loss doth by her death repair, and I might live long wretched so, but that my fire doth with my fuel grow. Now, as those active kings whose foreign conquests treasure brings, receive more and spend more and soonest break, this, which I am amazed that I can speak, this death has with my store my use increased, and so my soul, more earnestly released, will outstrip hers, as bullets flown before a latter bullet may overtake, the powder being more.
The Dissolution. Now, firstly, who is she? First line, she's dead, and all which die to their first elements resolve. Who's she?
Well, this is almost certainly Anne Moore, his wife. He marries Anne Moore, who is so he meets Anne Moore when he's during his time in the service of Sir Thomas Egerton in 1597,
As
and
an MP or
yeah,
lawyer
no,
or diplomat or something?
he joins Sir Thomas Egerton's service in 1597 as his secretary. Sir
That's
Thomas
it,
Egerton
yes.
is the brother to Sir John Moore, I think it is, who is the MP,
Right.
and he secretly marries Anne Moore, who is Sir Thomas Egerton's niece in 1601.
Yes.
He is cast out from Sir Thomas Egerton's service due to this, and it's like he gets put into abject poverty because of this.
Right.
However, he seems to have throughout his poetry this underlying theme of his devotion. He has a really strength of love to Anne Moore. He uses a lot of puns, for instance, when he talks about her. For example, in the end of that poem, the powder being more. Obviously, with the names Donne and Moore, it's quite easy to make puns.
It is. The other one he wrote after the marriage broke down, or at
Yes.
least initially it broke down. He wrote John Donne and Done Undone, which I'm sure you know
Yes.
is quite funny.
Yeah. He also has in A Hymn to God My Father, he ends each stanza with when thou hast done, thou hast not done, I have no more. Which was about God and his
Very good. Yeah.
possession of him. But yeah, clearly he has a deep devotion to Anne Moore, and this is really what underpins his love poetry. Similarly to his religious poetry, Donne is trying to elevate his love for Anne Moore, for instance.
Yeah.
He sees it as beyond the physical. Before he meets Anne Moore, he talks a lot about he has more like raunchy poems. I think the way I would describe them is that they're the poems that are like they're the banterous poems in like the lads group chat. He doesn't publish these poems like publicly. He kind of just shares them amongst his friends. So they're quite raunchy. So stuff like to his mistress going to bed, or he says like America, my newfound found lands, let my hands roam around under and beneath, which is
Yeah.
one of the stranger lines that an English poet's written. But clearly with it changes for his Anne Moore, his poems about Anne Moore, they're no longer about this idea of bodily and like sexual imagery. It's no
Yeah.
longer so much as he's not being so like not nasty with it. Um, he approaches his Anne Moore poetry with more platonic devotion.
Yes.
He sees his love as transcendent beyond the physical realm. So it's no longer about like the flea where there is a real physical connection between Anne and between John and his lover. The flea talks about how the flea is bitten both Donne and his lover. Therefore, they are not breaking any purity boundaries because the flea has already mixed their blood. So they are them having sex makes no difference.
His wife had 12 kids. They had 12 kids. two
Yes.
were stillborn, three died before they reached the age of 10. He ended up writing this poem about, or pamphlet was it, about suicide by
Yes. Yeah,
Thanatos,
Beyond Thanatos, yes.
which led to his meditations on health. So I guess my question to you is, do you think that his numerous illnesses, the financial strain he faced at the start of his life, and the deaths of his friends as well, did they all contribute to the development of his more somber poems, solemn poems at the end of his life?
I'd certainly say a lot of that is more a lot of that comes from his religious foundations and his conversions, um, and his greater connection. I guess the presence of death allows him to start considering these metaphysical concepts, these things which exist beyond him. But he does that even with his ideas of love. I think a lot of it is his ponderance on reality. Um, Once he starts turning his mind away from just the being a rake, essentially, he starts to really consider the world around him and how it how it's constructed and how it relates to to that which exists beyond. And we can really see how I think that's really what founds this more somber poetry, because it's not necessarily somber in my mind. A lot of it, even his poems about Anwar's death, such as The Dissolution, they are they're not necessarily sad. He talks about how
Right.
they will how my use increased, and so my soul, more earnestly released, will outstrip hers. He will be reconnected with her in death. Um, she is dead, all which die to their first elements resolve. There is a base element which exists to their love. It's not so much somber, it's
Mm.
more a questioning of reality and understanding what is the nature of their love. Um, he also talks in his elegies about how their love will never age, even in death. They are still chained together. He is
Yes.
chained to her by the strands of hair that tie his hands in
Mm.
his grave. Um, and these, I think that I think it's wrong to say that necessarily his poetry becomes more somber. I think it becomes more introspective, um,
Mm.
and I think that's what the dissolution really shows. And I think it's the dissolution really shows that how the more poems change. Um, this idea that love exists as a physical element. Donne uses a lot of alchemical imagery.
Yeah.
Alchemy being this trying to understand how to make gold from base metals. Um, and Donne really likes this idea of understanding like the elements, the physical elements of that which is like divine, that which exists beyond the physical. So for
Mm.
love, that which dies and more, to its first elements resolve. There is a substance which underpins love. My fires of passion, sighs of air, waters of tear, and earthly sad despair. These emotions are for Donne tied to physical things, like things which exist.
Mm.
And I think that's really how he starts to see love. It is metaphysical in nature.
That's quite cyclical as well. It links it back to what you started with the other poem, with metaphysical becoming physical, religious becoming, I guess, mundane maybe. So let's rest on that for a second. About Donne's style as a metaphysical poet, can you just very simplistically, I suppose, talk about what it meant to be a metaphysical poet? It's not a label that he would have been familiar with, right? Was it given
Mm.
in the 17th, sorry, in the 18th century, was it?
I think it's given. I think it's given by Samuel Johnson in the
Okay,
17th century. He mostly
okay,
uses an application to Dryden and Donne. Um, but so metaphysical poets were they were the English poets about this time who are focusing on like conceits. Conceits are essentially extended metaphors which pair an object to a concept.
yes.
Um, so in some senses, like the blossom, he compares like this idea of flowering to love, um, or the relic. These for Donne, he tries to tie as I as I say as I said quite a few times now, the metaphysical to the physical. He's tying everything down to an object. So
Right.
stylistically, this involves things like paradoxes. Like
Yes.
these are opposing ideas which are kind of interconnected. Like stuff like love, they shouldn't really be manifested in the physical world because it's not platonic love is not so much physical. It's meant to be non-physical. The forms exist in the world outside the sensible particulars.
But metaphors have been used for yonks before Donne, right? Like even the Elizabethans, they were tying love to the outside world. Roses, I mean, it's the most famous image of a love. What made the metaphysical conceit different was the fact that it was more. It was trying to draw together seemingly different and bizarre objects, vastly different ideas into one, right?
Yeah, and as you say, that's where the paradox really manifests. It seems so strange to have these two things tied together because Plato distinguishes between the physical realm of the form, the physical realm of the sensible particulars, and the realm of the forms. There is meant to be a divide, but Donne kind of ties those together, and the paradoxes really come through in his poetry because it doesn't seem to, in occasion, make sense that what he's saying, like his I think the poem we read earlier, Holy Sonnet 19, he starts to, his speech gets so confusing, it turns into paradox, as praying, as mute, as infinite, as none. These ideas you can't quite describe how he feels, because it's a concept you can't really describe in a physical manner. He struggles, it's almost as if his language can't quite comprehend what he's trying to say.
Yeah, that's
And that
really
is
good.
really where and that comes through in his love poetry.
Great, amazing. Well, I feel like we have you've really helped us in understanding Dunn. So thank you so much, George. It's been a real pleasure to have you on here. Could I just ask a final question of you, and that is, we're in the Big 26. We're quite far from Dunn, and I think he's escaped the school curriculum, sadly, or at least my GCSEs A levels didn't
I
really hear of him until.
I don't-
Yeah. Well, there you are. There you are. My bad. So he hasn't quite escaped the school curriculum. But why? Why? I guess why does his message hold value today? Why is he your favorite poet? Would you say?
well, I think that what Dunn's message holds value because well, in my mind, I think that there is poetry is trying to understand something. It's almost putting into words things which cannot be described. Um,
Yes.
and I think Donne is one of the people who do that best. Donne is plagued by ideas and constructs which he knows he cannot understand, which he knows which exist beyond him. He's plagued by this idea of human helplessness, helplessness against the forces of nature, against the forces of God that are beyond him. But I think it is so commendable his mission to almost understand these on a physical level and to
Mm.
try and qualify them within human reason. Because I think, um, as I said with Aquinas, he recognizes he has rector ratio, but that rector ratio, that human reason, is
Mm.
marred. It's imperfect. Karl Barth talks about an over reliance on human reason because human reason is faulty. But
Yeah.
and I think that's what's so beautiful about Donne is this imperfection
Mm.
struggling, really, really fighting to understand perfection,
Yeah.
to qualify perfection. He's trying to contain the infinite within 14 lines in a stanza. Sorry, 14 lines in a sonnet, or just within a stanza, and it's beautiful.
He does so successfully, right? And more so than maybe a novelist. Uh, you know. So we argue that's what's so great about poetry. Uh,
Mm.
Thank you. That it's been a great journey through the life of John Donne and the work of John Donne. It's been a pleasure to have you on, as I say so many times, but I do mean it. And
Thank
hopefully
you.
you can come back and tell us about maybe another metaphysical or otherwise. But thank
We'll
you,
see.
George. It's been great.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye.